Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Writers Podcast. I have with me today fiction writer, previously a journalist, but now fiction writer, Ken MacQueen. Hello, Ken. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Lou. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Not a problem. So you've most people when they come on and I interview them, I'm always curious about how they got into writing and so forth. But given your background, I'm assuming that writing has always been part of your life.
Well, it has. I've always enjoyed it, and I've been a full-time writer, journalist for decades. So,
okay. Which were you freelance, or did you work for specific papers? Or
I worked for. I was never freelance. I was too disorganized. I would have starved to death. I worked at various times for Canadian Press Wire Service, the Ottawa Citizen, and the Vancouver Sun at one point. But most of my career was with Southern News.
Okay.
And before, and then I switched for 15 years. I was the Vancouver bureau chief for Maclean's magazine.
Oh, okay.
Which meant I was everywhere but Vancouver most of the time.
Right. I see from your website you've had quite a few very, well, at least from a Canadian perspective, high-profile stories. You were involved with the Terry Fox story for a time.
Yes, I was. I traveled through part of Northern Ontario with him.
Okay.
In the van. It was a strange experience because he and I were pretty much exactly the same age at the time. And,
oh, really? Wow.
I was so impressed with his determination and the work that he did, running that marathon every day for all of those months. And it was an impressive thing. I also covered Olympics, so I know how hard it is to do what he was doing on a daily basis with one artificial leg. So my goodness,
yeah, an amazing story. And for non-Canadians, I suggest you just Google Terry Fox, and you'll find out quite a few very interesting stories about him. And if you go to Ken's site, you can also track down the articles that Ken wrote there as well. So Ken, let's talk a little bit about your background then. Where you're from and how you got into writing, and did you always want to be a journalist or a writer, and how did that all pan out for you?
Well, I grew up in what was then Preston, Ontario, which is west of Toronto. It's now Cambridge, Ontario.
Right.
And when my father worked in a factory, I didn't really know what my future was going to be, but we to pay the mortgage, we took on boarders from time to time. And one of those boarders, when I was about, 7 years old, happened to be a reporter for the Galt Reporter, which was a small Thompson newspaper daily in Cambridge, or Preston, Galt. And one day he took me along on his thing. He was wearing like a suit jacket and a tie, and this seemed really cool. And we ended up going to a little zoo we had in Riverside Park in Preston, and he took my picture there. And the next day, I was in the newspaper. My picture, it was magic.
Right.
So at that point, 7 years old, I vowed I would become a reporter, and I did. Talk about a lack of imagination, but that's when it all started. And my first weekly newspaper job was with Milverton, which is a small Mennonite town, basically.
Interesting.
And so there was not a lot of news going on there,
right?
But it was good. So that was a summer job. And then the next year I got a summer job at the Kitchener-Waterloo Record, which was the big regional daily at the time. And I just stayed on with them. And I realized I got this press card signed by the chief of police, and it was like getting the keys to the kingdom.
Nice. So then in terms of education, what did you take?
I studied journalism at the community college level. I'm not sure
Okay.
anyone would hire a reporter now who doesn't have a master's degree, but
Right.
that's what I had, and it was a very practical education, and it worked well for me.
Right. And were you interested in fiction at that point too, or?
Oh, I guess it was always in the back of my mind, but I was more
Right.
interested in paying a mortgage.
Okay.
I realized that you know, I wasn't going to get rich writing fiction unless, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I look at my my book Hero Haters as an 81,000 word lottery ticket.
Oh, okay.
So
Nice.
maybe I'll strike it rich, but at the very least, it was a challenge I wanted to attempt.
Sure. As a journalist, I don't know how much were you a big reader though of fiction? Or
Oh yes, very much so.
Okay.
And I read in the genre that I write in now, which is thrillers and mysteries and things like that.
So favorite authors?
Oh my gosh, I'll tell you, a lot of them happen to be former journalists. That's when I said the penny finally dropped that, you know, journalism's a great apprenticeship. There's Linwood Barclay, John Sanford, Rick Mafina, Michael Connolly, all of these are former journalists, and Val McDermott, and even a person named Leslie McFarland, who was a Canadian and was the ghostwriter for the Hardy Boys for about the first 20 books of the Hardy Boys.
Okay, interesting.
So the Hardy Boys were what I call my gateway drug into the genre when I was a little kid. So yeah.
So you've been a journalist for how many years before you got the penny drop?
Well, when my mortgage got paid off, basically. No, it was a case of I was actually four decades as a journalist. So I had a great time. As you may know, things are a little harder in the journalism business these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got out at a time when it was still a great place to work.
Right.
I could spend money. I traveled the world, covered 9 Olympic Games, and raced off to any manner of crises along the mostly the American and Canadian West Coast, and even down to the Mexican border. So it was great. I could spend the money that I needed, and Maclean's, or previous to that, Southern News, was happy to spend the money to do that. These days, I don't know. I don't think it would be as much fun. So.
Right. Yeah, it's like many industries, especially the newspaper industry, has really undergone a lot of changes with the advent of the internet and so forth. But yeah, it's but it's a great ground for sort of like built-in research for you, and I guess other journalists, because they've traveled so much in that they've seen a lot of places, met a lot of people. So you must have a lot of background material in your file folders that you can pull from to use for your fiction stories.
Well, this is very true. Of course, you have to fictionalize it, but one thing I did learn is that it's hard to make stuff up. It's not, I mean, we were accused as journalists. Well, I wasn't, but this whole fake news thing really got up my nose. It's a cheap way of trying to skate out of an inconvenient story that people don't want aired or written about.
Right.
But I realized that when I decided to become a fiction writer, I'd have to go back to school in a way. So I went to writers' conferences. I have a shelf full of fiction writing books from some of the greats. And so it was harder. And then, you know, I set this book in Aberdeen, Washington, which is Washington State. And so I had to really research that whole region, find out what some of the issues are. Even though you're making stuff up, you want to root it in reality. That gives you the confidence that you need, I think.
Sure. And why did you choose Aberdeen specifically? Or
because
is it
it's an interesting interesting back history. At the point that I chose it, it was just a spot on the map on the coast, and I wanted a port city because they're edgy. I live in Vancouver. In fact, I'm looking out over Burrard Inlet right now from where my our home is. But so I wanted a port. I wanted it in a U.S. port, and I wanted an edgy background. And then I started researching Aberdeen, and it was this gift that kept giving. First of all, I had forgotten or didn't know that Aberdeen was the home of two of the members of, well, Kurt Cobain, especially from Nirvana, and also the bassist from Nirvana. They were both from Aberdeen. So that added a certain grunge, whatever you want to call it, flavor to the area. But also, as I was researching further, I found out that there was this serial killer active just at the turn of the last century, so more than 100 years ago, named Billy Goal. And
that's a good name.
Yeah. Gohl. But I started looking at this, and I thought, And then I researched his trial, which went on in 1910. And he was accused by the police of killing as many as 200 people.
Wow.
And Aberdeen became known as the home of the floater fleet because there were so many bodies that were drifting in the harbor or in the tributaries leading to the harbor. So I thought, well, I'm not writing historical fiction. I'm not one of these time travel writers, but somehow I have to find a way to get Billy into this story, because a serial killer is a terrible thing to waste. So I did manage to do it. I won't say how, but because that would be a big spoiler. But
okay, all right. So that's sounds like a nice setup for your first book, Hero Haters, correct? Which just hit the market October 5th.
That's
this
right.
year. So why don't you tell us about Hero Haters? What's the deal with that book?
Okay, well, basically, Hero Haters is about a medal. I'll if I show you the book cover, cheap plug here, you'll see there's a hero medal on this thing, and I have a creation of something called the Sedgewick Sacrifice Medal, which was a civilian medal awarded to extraordinary heroism for everyday people who aren't soldiers or people who are paid to be heroic. So these are people who might come across a house fire or a car crash or someone drowning, and they risk their lives to rescue a stranger. And this goes on in my book for over a century of doing this. It was underwritten by Philip Sedgewick, who is one of these robber baron type people who then decided to become a philanthropist, much like Andrew Carnegie or people like that. So anyway, in my story, the Sedgewick Trust uses former journalists to vet these heroes, to research their backstory, make sure they're legitimate. So my guy, Jake Ockham, worked for Sedgewick as a staffer, and then he got called home to Aberdeen to run his struggling family's weekly newspaper, but he still vetted heroes in that case, on the West Coast. All of a sudden, the heroes he's vetted are disappearing, just vanishing, and he doesn't know why at that point. And he doesn't realize till well into the book that he's the ultimate target. Somebody really hates his guts, and somebody hates these heroes, and why is explained deeper into the book. But the reason that they're being kidnapped, these heroes, is they're being videotaped and forced into acts of heroism on the dark web for twisted subscribers to a particularly weird website. So they're paying huge money to watch these heroes recreate their heroism and very often die in the attempt.
Wow, that's a pretty novel concept, but I can see where you've drawn on a lot of your background to get this all together into this novel. Man. Um, so is this a intended to be a series then, or?
Well, God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'd love to have another go at it.
Right.
I quite like my character Jake Ockham and his helper, his friend Eric Demidov, who is very adept at working the internet and understanding. He's more of a active fellow than my journalist friend, Jack Ockham, who wouldn't like to kill people, but Eric would be less concerned about that sort of thing. And he's also very adept at searching things on the internet. He runs a digital investigations company. So between the two of them, they become a formidable pair.
And Ockham is interesting. Is that kind of a play on Occam's razor, or is that just a coincidence? I don't know.
His name is spelled differently. Let's put it at that.
But it sounds the same.
Part way through, you might find out that yes, there might be. It might be his family name.
Okay.
And
cool.
it might be go way back to a 14th century monk, I believe it was.
Wow.
The original Ockham.
Cool. So, as writing your first fiction book, what was the hardest thing or difference that you found doing this as opposed to journalism?
That's a good question. Many things. Of course, the whole rhythm and arc over an 80,000 word plus book is different. You've got to have so many ebbs and flows along the way. Right. But also just the lack of instant gratification. I was used to working first for a wire service and then for a weekly news magazine. So you'd punch send, the editors would fluff it up a bit, make it presentable, and off it would go. And a couple of days later, I'd have a magazine in my hand. Or when it was the wire service, a couple of hours later, the story would be out in places like the Edmonton Journal and all of the other various southern papers across the country. So I guess it was the lack of instant gratification that took a little getting used to. Plus, while this is my first book, Hero Haters, that's published, I have two others sitting on my hard drive. And so far, I have not got them published. They're both set in Canada. Okay. And I'd hate to think it was because they were set in Canada that they haven't been published, but we'll just have to see. I think it's also the fact that I've developed my craft over the last years, and so the third book is definitely stronger. But I may go back and revisit the other two. But I also have plans for another Jake and Eric book.
Okay, so all the books you've written so far are with the Jake character?
No, the other characters are set in Canada, different cat altogether.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about either of those, or?
Well, we'll let them ripen on my hard drive like a fine cheese, and eventually they may see the light of day.
All right. So would you consider them completed, or are they first drafts, or? No,
they're about third or fourth or fifth drafts in both cases. But anyway, we'll see if I can get interest in them. But first of all, I've got about 6 chapters into the next Jake and Eric book, so I'm hoping that I'll get that one published too. Right.
And your first book, is it traditionally published or self-published?
It's not self-published. It's published through a New York state publishing house called Wild Rose Press.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's available. It is kind of a print-on-demand thing, at least in Canada. But it's available around the world on e-publication and print if you order it that way.
Right. Okay. And for your writing process, do you have like a set time or a word limit? Like how do you approach that?
I approach it in the morning. I have to be fresh.
Right.
Believe it or not, this is my idea of fresh. It's the best I can do.
looks pretty relaxed to me.
Anyway, I tend to like to start at about 8 a.m., work through till noon, maybe 1 o'clock if things are going. I don't base it on a word count.
Okay.
And I don't over plot my books. I had a rough idea of the characters and their backstories. How it was going to end, I didn't know when I started the book.
Yeah. So you're a discovery writer.
Yeah, and I do a scene a day if it works well. So I just have this little movie running in my head, and these scenes become, these days, as you well know, chapters are much shorter than they used to be.
Yeah.
So I would guess maybe 1,500 words or 2,000 words in a scene. And generally when that movie in my head flickers out for that day, then I realize, okay, it's time to set down my book and take a walk or do something else.
Right.
And then overnight, maybe I'll come up with, I know where the book is going, or at least the next scene.
Right. Very cool. I'm a little surprised actually that you are sounds like a discovery writer. I would figure as a journalist where you had to know the facts and had the beginning and the end and everything plotted out, that would be kind of the method that you would be using for fiction. But
well, yes and no. You have to realize that certainly when I was writing for Maclean's, the story is very dynamic. So when you start at say on a Monday or something, the story might be one thing. Right. By the time you start making more phone calls or knocking on more doors or getting off a plane at a different place, you realize that the story has to evolve. You can't stick with the outline that you thought you had, because facts can become very inconvenient. So I would often be right up to deadline, with an editor. Right. They were pretty patient, but I'd be sometimes clicking send on a story just hours before we went to press. So you had to think on your feet. So that has served me well, I guess, in fiction to some degree.
Right. Yeah. And I never thought of it that way, but you're right. Life doesn't stand still. So it keeps going forward. So you have to be on top of the story all the time and ready to react to the newest events or whatever's going on. And especially in this connected world, that's even more true than ever. So very interesting. True, interesting. Yeah. So when you finished your first book, do you have like beta readers and things of that nature? Like
yes, I do. And I had hired a wonderful, she's since left her job as a freelance editor, but she worked for Penguin Random House before that as a very top acquisitions editor there in Canada. So I hired her to do all 3 of my books, to give them a first read and to make suggestions. So that was the first go on this one, Hero Haters as well. And she made some excellent suggestions to move the story along. Too much backstory at the beginning that was death to the momentum of the plot. So I shuffled chapters around at her advice. So that was the first thing. My wife, who's a former senior newspaper editor, was my first reader and always will be. And she had very good suggestions. Cool. And then I had a couple of dear friends who have either great fans of the genre or great editing experience. Right. One of them was worked at the Edmonton Journal as an entertainment editor. She was very helpful in this. She's so I went through all of those. And then, of course, when I got my publishing contract with Wild Rose, it went through more rounds of editing. And my first orders were to cut 10,000 words. So that was a bit of a challenge, but it's a better book for it. It was at 90,000 words and it was a little flabby, I guess. So now it's svelte.
Yeah, I remember, I think Stephen King said that in his On Writing book. The most useful advice he got was first draft minus 10%. And then once he did that, then his stuff started to sell. So it sounds like you sort of went through the same experience with your book.
Yeah, I don't quite put myself in his category, but yes, absolutely. He's very right about that. So I had great editing at Wild Rose, and that that really whipped the book into shape.
Okay. So as a journalist turning to fiction, do you struggle with putting in too much of your research into the story?
That's a very perceptive question. Yes, I'm afraid that is the case. And that was part of my, one of my many sins, I think, was putting a little too much background in, and the balance and things like that you value in journalism, but is death in a longer narrative like a book.
Right.
So I realized that you had to, if you're going to put it in, you have to fold it in, weave it in, or leave some surprises for the reader to discover as you go along. So yes, that was one of the things that I really had to restrain myself from over researching, because I got all this cool stuff, pages and pages and pages of history on Aberdeen and Washington State, and on heroes as well. The whole subject of heroes was something I researched. I went way down rabbit holes on that, and it's quite fascinating. Motivation of people who risk their lives for strangers.
Yeah, like you've come up with a very novel concept, that's for sure. I've never heard a thriller series based on that particular set of circumstances, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, they've been studied. There's a whole school of looking at this sort of thing, and basically these are people who get up in the morning, walk down the street or whatever. They have no idea they're going to be a hero. I mean, everyone in their imagination considers themselves potentially heroic, but the people that will actually act and risk their lives to do something like that is probably extremely rare. And when asked later, when interviewed later, I've read many interviews about this, they said, well, why did you do it? And they go, I don't know. I
just reacted.
Did it. I just reacted. It's a very instinctive thing. And it's, you know, I asked myself as I was writing this, could I do that? And mercifully, I don't know the answer because I haven't had to confront it.
Yeah, it's a very cool idea. I wish you all the luck with that. That sounds fascinating, and you can draw on so much material, like you said, that and I think that that idea will strike a chord with people outside of the normal thriller tropes as well. So that I think it bodes well. I have no idea how well your book is going to do for you. I wish you all the success, of course, but based on your based on your conceit, I think it's pretty fresh. So that's always a good thing.
I hope so. It's pretty hard to find fresh avenues of approach these days. But I would really think, I would love for, you know, book clubs to discuss this whole heroism aspect of it. We have so many instant heroes in our lives that are really not, you know, it's cheapened the term often when you look at various things. So that these to me are very pure heroes.
Yeah, and in today's cynical times, this kind of idea is something that I think a lot of people would gravitate towards, because we get so much bad news. Good news stories that are dramatically interesting, that would be great, because by and large, unfortunately, good news makes for boring reading for like in real life, right? Like if you do, you know, like how often I think when I watch news programs, I think they used to have maybe like a good news segment. Now that they call it a people segment or a soft segment or whatever, but it's often a small part of the overall show, which is program, which is so focused on negative things. And I just think that we really could use more positive things. And if you can mix it into a something that emotionally hooks the reader or the viewer, that could be gold. I think so.
Now, of course, for the purposes of a thriller, I had to not only celebrate these heroes, but then kill them off or risk killing them off. So that was kind of a perverse thing. But I do believe at the end of the day, it ends up being a positive story, even though there's a bit of collateral damage along the way, shall we say.
So outside of your fiction writing, which so far it sounds like you've just concentrated on long form, have you done any sort of like short stories of things of that nature?
No, I haven't.
No.
Maybe I'm too long-winded.
Okay. And do you see yourself sticking strictly within the thriller genre for writing? Would you ever consider branching out into other genres, horror, science fiction, fantasy?
Probably not. I'd be totally at sea if I were to try.
Okay.
Certainly science fiction. I can't. I'm not what you would call gifted when it comes to science. In that, taking science is hard enough to understand, but then twisting it another way,
right.
that would be a real challenge for me. So I think I'll stick with what I know.
Sure.
And hope that works.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions I have. Is there anything that hasn't come up that you would like to bring up at this time?
Not really, except of course that the book is available.
Hold up the cover again, if you want.
If you insist.
Yeah, of course. It's a cool cover. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
that looks like Queen Elizabeth a bit, but maybe it's
actually it's Philip Sedgewick is
okay.
his name. He's not real, but he's my robber baron. And the cover was designed by a woman named Kim Mendoza, who is on contract with Wild Rose. And,
okay.
I was really happy with the cover.
That reminds me. Do you have a audio version, or do you planning to do that?
Not at this point.
Okay.
I would love to, though. I love reading, listening to audiobooks. In fact, I'm reading a Stephen King one right now on audio. I call it reading. It's not really that, I guess, but it's a great thing to be walking down the street and with earbuds in. You just have to make sure you don't get hit by a bus or something if you get too engrossed.
or a van like Stephen King got hit by.
Yes, exactly.
So which book are you listening to? I'm just
The Institute.
The Institute. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I'm a big Stephen King fan. I've read everything. I actually do another just Stephen King focused podcast. So,
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan. I just listened to his for the first time. I've read it like almost every year is on writing. But for the first time, I listened to the audio version, and it adds that extra dimension that the written word can't give you. Because
actually, Lou, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
I'll dial him up next on the writing book, because that is up here on my shelf somewhere. Because I'm a huge fan of that book, but I haven't reread it in a long time. I could probably use a good kickstart.
Yes, for sure. Well, Ken, I really appreciate you taking time with this. I wish you all the best with your series. And again, it's available right now at all your normal outlets. I assume you can get on Amazon, whatnot, for Kindle. And
yes, and not in bookstores, unfortunately. You have to order it pretty much through the publisher or through Amazon or through various other Barnes and Noble in the States and various places like that. But you can certainly get it electronically on EPUB right away as Kobo or Kindle or any of these other Nook as well. Okay. And please drop by my website if you want a little more information, and that's just Ken MacQueen. That's MacQueen.com, all one word.
Very good. I'll include that in the show notes so people can just click on the link if they happen to come across this episode, which would be great.
And I love your background there, Lou.
Thank you.
I'm very jealous of that.
It's not real. I wish it was. I like your background. It looks like very nice where you are. But, and it's not raining, so.
No, we've had a run of wonderful weather.
Yeah.
So I'll probably get out, plug in Stephen King, and go for a walk later today.
Very good. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day then, and down the road, hopefully we'll have you back on to talk about your next book.
Fabulous. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Ken. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.